Welcome back to the channel. I'm Corbin and thanks for clicking on this video. It's going to be a fun one today because I'm doing something that's a bit out of my comfort zone. If you're a leather worker, you probably got started off doing something like wallets, then maybe you did a belt, then you worked the courage up to do a tote bag, maybe even a messenger bag or a duffel bag. But eventually you've done those things and they get a little bit old, maybe a little bit more boring. But this is a project that's actually sparked a lot of excitement. As you can tell by the thumbnail you probably clicked on. Today I'm making a vest. And as of day before yesterday, I had never made a vest before, but I've actually made 3 between then and now, trying to figure out the best way to do it because I have no background in making any sort of garments or apparel. So this is all brand new to me. Maybe it's new to you as well. So hopefully this video will give you a good entryway into the world of making clothes if you're a leather worker. So let's get into it. Vests. And before you start the project, you need to find a vest to kind of work as a blueprint to help you make your pattern. So for me, that's this black vest right here. Pretty simple shape. I like the collar and that it doesn't have a flip back collar, whatever that would be called. And I like the zipper. It's cropped in the front so it doesn't bunch up when I sit down, and scooped in the back so that you don't get a rush of wind up your backside. Nobody wants that. So this is a vest that I like and that fits me well, so I'm gonna pretty much recreate it. So all I need to do that is a pencil and some poster board. I started out by matching the shoulder angle to the top of my poster board and trimming that off. I used some leather weights to keep the vest in place as I started to trace the shape. I added about a 1/4 inch to account for seam allowance, since this is going to be lined. If you want to make changes to the shape of the vest, now's the time to do it. On mine, I added about a 1/2 inch of length. Then I put the poster board inside the vest to trace the rest of the shape. I used a straight edge when possible and then freehanded some other details. I cut out the shape and the front template is complete. Since both of the front panels will be identical, I just have to make this one. Moving over to the back panel, I use my center finding rulers to mark the midpoint since I only have to trace half of this. I'll explain that in a little bit. I again marked the shoulder angle and added an extra 1/2 inch since this will overlap and be sewn to the front panel. It's important to check the back side with the front to make sure the shoulder and side seams line up properly. My only pattern tweak for this panel was to remove some material around the neck area, and in hindsight I probably should have removed even more. But back to the center line, I wrote myself a note to cut the shape along the fold of this material so that both sides are identical. That also saves some time. This is how the 2 pieces of the pattern will be oriented, making a C shape. The next thing I did was mark that 1/2 inch overlap line for the lap joint that I mentioned earlier. Then I double checked to make sure everything lines up properly, because if you do have a mistake in your pattern, it's going to cause a lot of headaches later. The pocket I came up with is a very simple one. It's a 9x7 flat pocket with the angle at the top. And I just eyeballed that angle, so your guess is as good as mine there. I'm using our Royal Chrome Tan leather, which is 3 to 4 ounces and has some beautiful pull-up. I chose it because I love the way it looks, but in hindsight, I should have used a 2 to 3 ounce because it did get a little bit thick in some areas. Another word of caution, maybe try using wax canvas for your first try. It's also a great material for a vest, but it's more affordable and easier to cut and sew. There's likely going to be a learning curve and some mistakes on your first attempt, so don't use your prized leather on your first try, is what I'm trying to say. Save that for when you understand the construction of your vest better and have dialed in your pattern. When cutting out the first section of leather, I needed to make sure that I had enough for both sides of the vest after it was folded. I placed the long side against the fold, and this section will not get cut. I set my weights on top to prevent the 2 layers from becoming misaligned, but you could also use clips. I'll do that later with the lining material. I marked the shape with a scratch awl and cut the straight parts with the rotary cutter and the curves with the precision knife. I repeated those steps for the front panels, but I cut those out one at a time to reduce leather waste. Make sure you flip your pattern over for the second one to create a mirrored version, not an identical shape. To reduce thickness, I made the pockets out of wax canvas. I folded a hem on top and on the short side and punched a rivet hole in the corner. I sewed the top hem off camera and clipped and sewed it into place. Also off camera, sorry. Then I installed those reinforcement rivets using the handy press and started cutting the cotton canvas for the lining. The process is the same as what I did for the leather, except in all the places I used the precision knife on the leather, I used scissors on the fabric. There are the clips I mentioned which kept the layers from shifting apart. I'm going to be using a lot of those because as a leather worker, pins scare me, and so I avoid them when possible. With all the materials cut, it's time to start sewing them together. I marked the 1/2 inch guideline and basted the front and back together before realizing I forgot something.
Wait.
Before sewing the front and back together to create a big cumbersome assembly, I wanted to attach the zipper to the front panels. I cut the zipper down to about 16 inches and removed 6 teeth to make enough room for the zipper stops and a hem at the top. The lighter helps melt any strings that came loose when I was removing those teeth, and it just makes it look a lot cleaner. We've got these nice zipper stop pliers, which makes this part of the process really easy. You can also install these with needle nose pliers and a little extra effort. Then I basted down the top hem and basted the zipper onto the leather. The side with the zipper pull goes on the right, and the zipper box goes on the left. I position the zipper facing towards the sides of the vest, but when we sew on the lining, we'll turn the vest right side out, and the zipper will face the opposite direction towards the opening of the vest, where it's supposed to be. Then I could go back and start sewing the panels together. I did a double seam for added strength, and I thought it looked nice.
We're getting somewhere.
Hey, if you've watched the channel for a while, you might be thinking this video feels a little bit different, and it is. We made a new channel recently where we post laid-back projects like this, answer some questions, and give you some behind-the-scenes stuff, and some fun shorts. So if you're liking this video, subscribe to the Sailrite Uncut YouTube channel to see more stuff like this in the future. It'll be the first link in the description. Now back to the project. Unfortunately, the easy parts of the project are officially over because it's time to add the lining. I placed the right sides together and used a ton of clips. I followed this diagram to know when to clip and sew. And you might want to take a screenshot of this diagram because this is what took me the longest to figure out, so hopefully this simplifies it for you. The places with an X should be left unsewn so we can turn the vest right side out later. And everything else gets sewn. This is the section I'll sew first. Did I mention I used a lot of clips? Other clip users will be quick to point out I put the clips on upside down, and you're correct. I was actually planning to sew with the leather on top, but with the zipper sandwiched between these two layers, it was easier to sew with a thinner, more flexible material on top. If you're curious, I'm using Tech 70 thread and a size 16 needle, and like I mentioned earlier, my seam allowance is 1/4 inch. The next sections I sewed were the armholes. Then after that, the small sections at the corners of the back panel, leaving a 12-inch gap in the middle and the sides unsewn. Now it's time to test your patience. Turn the vest right side out. Insert your hand through the side of the back panel and pull both sections through that same opening. This was much easier with the wax canvas. The leather was more tricky, but still possible. I just went inch by inch, trying not to pull too hard and rip the lining. Once the first side was out, I did the same thing for the other side. I started off with my arm in the other opening to get it started, but remember both sides need to exit the same opening before you can turn the rest of the vest right side out.
Eureka. I think. Yes.
I smoothed out the corners with my edge creaser and hammered down the seams as flat as I could. Next, I top stitched the armholes, but stopped when I reached the openings. I slowed down and hand turned over the shoulder seam since it was getting pretty thick. The other sections will be top stitched later. I decided I wanted a chest pocket, so I threw this one together. It's 4.5 by 6 inches, and I added a loop for my pencil. If you plan on adding a chest pocket, now's the time to do it, because once the side seams are sewn together, it'll be harder to access this area. And the reason I didn't sew this on before the lining is because it would have been even harder to turn right side out because you're adding more material. If the whole pocket was wax canvas though, you might be able to get away with it. Now for the mystical, confusing part of the project, sewing the side seams together. I folded over and clipped the sides together, put my arm in the opposite side opening, and then pulled those two sides through that opening. And this is going to look and feel weird, but trust me, it works in the end. I fished out those clips and shifted the material over so that it butted against each side of the opening. If you have to, you can rip a couple stitches from the bottom section if you need to make that gap wider. It should look like this when you're done clipping. It should lay flat and the two layers of leather should be touching with no lining fabric in between them. Here is what my shoulder looks like while I sew, and here's what the double seam looked like as I sewed it. Then you just have to pull that side out to reveal your nice hidden seam. I didn't figure this out until my third vest, and it looks so much better than the other things I tried. For the other side, we do the exact same process, but pull it through the bottom opening, then sew it. And since this is the second time sewing this should be no problem. Unfortunately, I missed a part at the top, so I turned it back inside out and sewed another seam to close the gap. Kind of sloppy work, but it still looked good after this fix. Those corners just got so thick and it threw me off. My fault for choosing the thicker leather and not skiving those areas down. To finish the vest, all that's left is to close the bottom opening and top stitch around the entire perimeter. That will sew that opening closed and also make all the seams lay more flat. When I top stitch like this, I sew about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And here it is, the final product. Fits pretty well, and I like the look of it. Navy's my favorite color, so can't go wrong with that. I would recommend starting with wax canvas before you try to make a leather vest. This is just easier to work with, and it'll make sewing it a lot more smooth, because this got pretty thick in some areas, which was hard to sew. I should have used a 2 to 3 ounce leather. But anyways, I hope you learned from some of my mistakes and learned about the basic construction of the vest, which is kind of the best part of the video, I think, is just how to make it with the nice hidden seams on the side. That took me forever to figure out and lots of research. So passing that on to you, hopefully it helps you. If you learned something or enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel. It really means a lot to me, and I'll see you in the next video. I'm gonna go look in the mirror now. Vests.